Rhode Island isn't the kind of place people imagine when they think of horror. It's quiet, ordinary, small roads, trees, simple homes that look like they've been there forever. And that's what makes this story disturbing. Because the most terrifying places aren't castles or abandoned asylums. Sometimes they're farmhouses. The house sits in rural Rhode Island. A traditional American farmhouse. Wood, simple roofline, nothing dramatic. The kind of place you drive past without thinking. But this one became a legend. The Conjuring House. A home linked to decades of fear, long before any movie made it famous. And the most important part is this. This wasn't built as a haunted attraction. It was built as a home. In the early 1970s, the Perron family was searching for a fresh start. Roger and Carolyn Perron had 5 daughters. They wanted space, land, quiet. A place where their children could grow up free. When they found the farmhouse, it looked like everything they needed. Old, yes, but beautiful, peaceful, full of promise. They moved in believing they had found paradise. But almost immediately, the house felt wrong. Not in a dramatic way. In a subtle way that's harder to ignore. The air felt heavier in certain rooms. Some corners felt colder. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt occupied. At first, the signs were small. A strange smell that appeared and vanished. A door that didn't stay shut. Footsteps upstairs when everyone was downstairs. Old houses make noise. People explain it away. The parents tried to do the same. Because no family wants to admit they made a mistake the first week they moved in. But then the animals reacted. Dogs refusing to enter certain rooms. Sudden panic for no reason. Barking at empty spaces. And the children started noticing things adults try to ignore. Not monsters. Not shadows. Just presences. The feeling that someone was in the house with them. Watching. Waiting. What makes the Perron story frightening is that it didn't happen as one big event. It happened like erosion. Slowly. Night after night. Daytime felt normal. The sun made the house seem harmless. But nighttime belonged to something else. Sounds felt closer. The quiet felt heavier. Sleep became restless. Dreams became disturbing. And Carolyn Perron began to feel something even worse than fear. A presence that seemed focused on her. Not just the family. Her. As if the house could sense when she was alone. As if it was testing how far it could push. The family tried to live with it. But over time, the farmhouse changed how they moved. They avoided rooms. They stayed close together. They slept with lights on. They stopped living like a family in a home. And started living like people trapped in a territory they didn't control. And the deeper they looked into the property's history, the darker it felt. Because this land wasn't new. Families had lived here for generations. People had died here. And in rural America, tragedy doesn't always become famous. Sometimes it just becomes part of the ground. Layer after layer. Until the place feels stained. The parents reached a point where endurance wasn't enough. This wasn't a weird old house anymore. It was a force inside their daily life. And when the family finally admitted they couldn't handle it alone, they did what desperate people always do. They asked for help. And that's when the story stops being a private nightmare and becomes a national legend. Because the people they called next were already known for one thing: walking into haunted homes and turning fear into a case file. Ed and Lorraine Warren. And when they entered the farmhouse, the house didn't get quieter. It got worse. Ed and Lorraine Warren didn't show up to the farmhouse like heroes. They showed up like professionals. By the time they arrived, the Perron family wasn't asking, "Is this real?" They were asking something worse. What is it, and how do we survive it? The Warrens had built their reputation on one idea: that some homes don't just feel wrong. They're occupied. And the Conjuring House was already behaving like it had rules. The first thing the Warrens did was simple. They listened. Not to the walls. To the family. They asked questions. Details. Patterns. Times. Locations. They mapped the fear the way a detective maps a crime scene. Which rooms felt cold? When did the noises begin? Who was targeted the most? What happened at night? And one fact kept repeating. The activity wasn't random. It had focus. It had intention. And the house wasn't treating everyone the same. It was pressing down hardest on Carolyn. Lorraine Warren walked the property and said she felt multiple presences. Not just one. Not a single ghost story. A crowd. A history stacked on top of itself. She described the energy as heavy, territorial, and protective, like something had claimed the land and didn't want the parents there. Ed Warren saw it differently. He believed the house wasn't just haunted. He believed it was infested, that something darker than a spirit was feeding off fear, using the family's exhaustion as an opening. To him, this wasn't about strange noises. It was about escalation. And escalation is what terrified the parents most, because they had already lived through the slow build-up. They knew what came next. The Warrens decided to hold a séance. That word alone changed the temperature in the room. A séance isn't a conversation. It's a challenge. It's walking into a stranger's territory and knocking on the walls until something answers. The family didn't want it. Some of the daughters were terrified, but the Warrens believed they needed proof. They needed confirmation. They needed to force whatever was inside the home to reveal itself. So they prepared. Lights lowered. Cameras set. People gathered close. And in that moment, the farmhouse became what it had always been hiding. A trap. At first, nothing happened. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels thick, like it's watching you back. Then the air changed. Not dramatically. Subtly. A pressure. A heaviness. Carolyn's breathing shifted. Her face went pale. And Lorraine noticed something that made her stiffen. Carolyn wasn't just afraid. She looked pulled, as if her body was reacting to something the rest of the room couldn't see. Then it started. Carolyn's chair jolted. Her posture changed. Her voice changed. And the people around her realized something terrifying. She wasn't acting. She was slipping, like the house had found the crack it needed. Carolyn's body became the center of the room, and the center of attention. And when that happens, the entire room becomes helpless. Because you can't fight what you can't touch. The atmosphere turned hostile. Not spooky. Hostile. The kind of fear that feels like the room itself wants you out. One of the daughters screamed. Another backed away, crying. Roger tried to keep everyone calm, but his face said what he couldn't admit out loud. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in what he was seeing. The Warrens later claimed the seance revealed the name of a spirit tied to the land. A presence that hated Carolyn. A presence that didn't want the family in the home. A presence that had turned the farmhouse into a territory. And whether every detail is true or not, something undeniable happened that night. The house escalated. Because once you confront something inside a place like that, you don't reset the clock. You don't go back to normal. You only go forward. And forward, in this house, meant danger. When the seance ended, the family expected relief. Instead, the fear followed them into the next days. The activity grew more aggressive. The atmosphere grew heavier. The house felt awake. And Carolyn, especially, didn't feel safe even in daylight anymore. It was no longer a slow haunting. After the seance, the Conjuring House didn't calm down. It sharpened. The parents had lived through strange noises and cold rooms before. They had survived the slow creep of fear. But now the fear wasn't creeping. It was moving with purpose. The family felt it immediately. The air inside the house changed. The rooms felt tighter. The silence felt less like emptiness and more like pressure, as if something had been disturbed, as if something had been invited closer. Carolyn Perron became the center of it, not by choice, by force. The house started reacting to her presence in a way that felt personal, like she wasn't just living there. She was being confronted. She began waking up exhausted, even after hours of sleep. Her body felt heavy, like she had been fighting in her dreams without remembering it. And then the physical signs began. Bruises, marks, unexplained injuries that appeared overnight. Some were small. Some were too visible to ignore. And once you see something like that on your own skin, the haunting stops being psychological. It becomes real in a way you can't argue with. The daughters began to understand something terrifying. This wasn't a scary house. This was a house that could hurt their mother. And when a home crosses that line, when it stops being strange and starts being violent, fear becomes survival. The family started changing their behavior again, not just avoiding rooms, avoiding separation. They stayed close to each other, like distance could be punished, like being alone was dangerous. Even simple routines, laundry, cooking, walking down a hallway, began to feel like risks. Because the house didn't need darkness anymore. It was active in daylight. And that was the breaking point. Roger Perron tried to hold on to logic. He wanted explanations. He wanted reality. He wanted anything that didn't sound insane. But this house wasn't interested in being explained. It wasn't trying to convince him. It was trying to crush the family's control. And it was winning. Arguments started happening more often. Stress turned into tension. The atmosphere inside the home didn't just feel haunted. It felt unstable. like the building itself was feeding off exhaustion. Then came the moments that the family never forgot. The sounds weren't just footsteps anymore. They became movements. Thuds. Slams. Impacts that felt deliberate, like something heavy had been thrown against the house from the inside. The girls described doors moving on their own, objects shifting, the sense that someone was in the room, standing close, not visible, but close enough to feel. And once you feel something close enough, your instincts don't care if it's real. Your body reacts anyway. That's how fear becomes permanent. Carolyn began to lose trust in the house entirely. Not just certain rooms. The whole structure. The walls. The corners. The stairs. Every space felt like it could turn. The Conjuring House stopped being a home. It became a territory they were trespassing in, even though they owned it. And that's one of the most terrifying ideas in American horror. That you can buy a house, but you can't own it. The Warrens believed the situation was escalating into something darker than haunting. To them, this wasn't a ghost telling a story. This was an attachment. Something trying to claim. Something trying to push the family out, or break them until they left. And Carolyn was the doorway. The easiest target. The most vulnerable. The one the house had chosen. At this point, the family faced the decision every haunting story eventually reaches. Do you stay and fight? Or do you leave and survive? But leaving isn't simple when you've poured your life into a home. When you've moved 5 children into the countryside. When you've bet everything on a fresh start. And that's what made it even more brutal. They weren't trapped by chains. They were trapped by reality. They weren't trapped by chains. They were trapped by reality. Money, distance, pride, hope. The same things that trap people every day. And the longer they stayed, the more the house seemed to understand it had time. Because the Conjuring House didn't need to kill them in one night. It only needed to wear them down. Until fear became routine. Until fear became normal. Until the family stopped recognizing themselves. By the time the Perron family reached their breaking point, they weren't living in a home anymore. They were living in a schedule of fear. They measured days by what didn't happen, nights by what did. And the worst part was the pattern. Every time the family thought things might calm down, the house found a new way to remind them who was in control. Carolyn became thinner, tired, constantly on edge. Not because she was weak, because the situation was grinding her down. Sleep didn't restore her anymore. It just reset her for the next night. The girls watched their mother change, and that was the moment the haunting became personal for all of them. Because fear in a house is one thing. Fear for your mother is something else. Roger tried to keep stability, but stability is hard when your reality doesn't make sense. Families break under normal pressure, under debt, under stress, under isolation. Now imagine that pressure. Inside a house that never feels safe. Arguments became sharper. Trust became fragile. The entire family began living in a defensive posture, like they were waiting for the next hit. And in a way, they were. This is where most haunted house stories turn dramatic. But the Conjuring House wasn't dramatic. It was relentless. It didn't need spectacle. It just needed repetition. A sound. A presence. A door. A shadow at the edge of the hallway. Again. And again. And again. Until the family stopped asking, "Is it real?" And started asking, "How long can we last?" The parents considered leaving. But leaving meant admitting defeat. It meant giving up the dream they had sacrificed everything to build. And it meant something even harder. It meant accepting that the house had won. And for a long time, they weren't ready to accept that. So they stayed. They made rules. No one walks alone. No one sleeps in certain rooms. Lights stay on. Doors stay locked. They tried to create control. But the house didn't care about rules. At some point, the fear crossed into something that felt final. Not just another event. A warning. The kind of moment that makes you realize the situation is no longer strange. It's dangerous. The family later described incidents where Carolyn seemed not fully herself. Moments where her voice changed, her posture changed, her eyes went distant, like she was being pulled under the surface. And whether you believe in possession or not, the impact on the family was the same. They watched their mother become someone they didn't recognize. Even for seconds. Even for moments. That's enough. Because once you've seen the person you love become a target, you don't feel curiosity anymore. You feel panic. And panic forces decisions. The family began to talk about escape the way people talk about escape from a war zone. Not, maybe we should move. But how do we get out? The Warrens also believed they were running out of time. They saw a pattern. Escalation after contact, violence focused on Carolyn, growing instability in the household. To them, the house wasn't simply active. It was tightening its grip. And they feared one thing most: that the haunting would end with a tragedy that no one could undo. This is where the Conjuring story becomes darker than most people realize. Because the worst part isn't the noises. It isn't the cold rooms. It isn't the rumors. It's the slow collapse of normal life. It's the way a place can turn a family into survivors while they're still technically at home. It's the psychological prison of not knowing what will happen next, or who will be hit next. And when you're in that state long enough, you stop seeing the house as a building. You start seeing it as a presence, a force, something that is waiting for you to break. And the Perrons were close. The Perron family didn't defeat the house. That's the part most people don't understand. This isn't a story where evil is destroyed, the lights come back on, and everything ends cleanly. The Perrons survived. And surviving is different from winning. Because the Conjuring House didn't need a dramatic ending to leave its mark. It only needed time. Years passed. The family stayed far longer than most people imagine. Not because they enjoyed the fear, because real life doesn't allow easy exits. Money, responsibility, children. Reality has a way of trapping people more effectively than any ghost story. And over time, the farmhouse became a scar. Not just a place they lived. A place that changed them. It taught them caution. It taught them tension. It taught them how to live with constant uncertainty. And that's the darkest part of the Conjuring story. Even if every supernatural detail is questioned, the fear was real. The trauma was real. The exhaustion was real. That kind of experience doesn't vanish when you walk out the front door. It follows you. The Warrens became the most famous name attached to the case. For some, they were saviors. For others, they were controversial. But either way, the Conjuring House became a part of American paranormal history because of the simple fact that it produced something powerful. A story that never fully ends. Because this farmhouse is not just a location. It's a symbol. A symbol of what happens when a normal family moves into a quiet home, and the quiet turns against them. And that's why the Conjuring House still matters today. Not because of Hollywood. Not because of jump scares. But because it represents a fear that is older than any movie. The fear that you can do everything right and still end up in the wrong place. People still visit the house. People still argue about what was real. People still search for proof, for recordings, for evidence. Some believe the Perrons lived through something supernatural. Others believe stress, isolation, and suggestion built a legend that grew out of control. And here's the truth. Both possibilities are terrifying. If it was supernatural, then the world contains things we can't fight. If it wasn't, then the human mind can turn a home into a prison without needing anything paranormal at all. Either way, the result is the same. A family lost their peace, and a house became famous for taking it. The Conjuring House is still standing. That alone keeps the story alive. Because ruins feel finished, but standing buildings feel unfinished. They feel like the story is still happening behind the walls. Still waiting for the next family. Still collecting the next layer. And that's the final image you should hold on to. A farmhouse in Rhode Island. A normal-looking home in a quiet place. A building that became a global legend. Not because it was special on the outside, but because of what people claimed it did to them inside. A house that didn't need to kill anyone to become infamous. A house that simply refused to let go.